And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is the author and artist, John Scott. John has been on before, and we've talked about his NDE from eating a poisonous mushroom, and he returns today to give us some more information about NDEs and other things as well. John, thank you for being my guest again, and welcome.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks. This is the fifth podcast, and I was getting to a point where I was thinking I wasn't going to do too many more because I have pretty much said most of what I needed to say in the other podcasts. But thanks for having me again.
Well, we all want more, and we know that you have more information to give.
Yeah, look, information is an interesting an interesting bag of fish. It's because some information, the stuff that I'm holding is quite esoteric, and yet I'm trying to simplify it for people into palatable syntax or palatable words. We were just discussing this in the pre-interview about the use of words that we don't understand. And of course, when we're dealing, especially when you're dealing, in my case, studying metaphysics, they use words in Hebrew that are, or Hebrew or Paleo-Hebrew, which not everyone knows these words. And so I try to steer away from using those big esoteric words and try to go more into the energy of and the outcome of that particular word and where in the map of consciousness we fit. Because a lot of people will say that, oh, I've experienced this. And yet, because it's a subjective experience, it's very hard to put into that map for others to understand, because others might think they've been to the same place where, yes, they may have. Some cases, it's very subjective. So this is what opens up the whole debate about near-death experiences in general and what level and what people see. But the thing is, when we value add to an experience a belief on top of that, then that's where it can get into very weird territory. And I don't talk about something about a belief structure. I talk purely from the experience of what I saw.
And actually, now that you're saying that, what you saw, it's been about a year since you've been here. I probably had maybe 20,000 new people since you've been here. So can you just briefly tell people what happened to you or how your NDE happened?
Yeah, sure. I've spoken about this many times before. Basically, I went bush, as we say here in Australia. I was going out into the wilderness. This was the areas of our bush are quite dangerous, but there's places in the mountains that have tracks that are well known. Being an artist, back then, excuse me, we didn't have what you call cell phones back then. I mean, this is only a new invention. We didn't have internet. So you basically go in with supplies that you need, food. I mean, I was planning to go for the whole weekend, Friday night, Saturday night, even Sunday night, drive home on Monday. And being an artist, I always took my camera with me. And those were the days when we had film cameras. So I would take my camera. Sometimes I would take my sketchbook. I'm not a big one for sketching on site that much, but I do take it because I might see something of interest, because an idea is associated with a landscape or something, or I'll construct a landscape or whatever. I've been in the bush a lot of my life. I mean, my family, we used to pick mushrooms, all sorts of things, what we call bush tucker. I know quite a few things things we can eat, and there's a lot we can't eat in the bush. But mushrooms is an easy one. Sometimes I pick berries. I used to hunt when I was younger as well, which I won't touch a rifle or a gun anymore, because after that experience, I realised that everything has life in it. But basically, I came across what I thought were saffron cap mushrooms. Now, they're an orangey-looking mushroom. I misidentified. I ended up having what is known as Amanita muscaria. Amanita muscaria is the classic red one with the white broken bits on top. They're considered poisonous. And They can be depending on dosage. But I feel that due to my fitness level, because I was really at the echelons of my physical fitness, I didn't do substance abuse. I wasn't a huge alcohol drinker because I played ice hockey and I was very much into fitness. I was playing first grade ice hockey around the time. And so, of course, I'm super fit. You go for these walks are sometimes up to 15 kilometers, 20 kilometers, over the period of getting in and getting out. So it might be 10 kilometers in, 10 kilometers, what's that, 6 miles? 6 mile in, 6 mile out. The place I went to, I'd been to many times before with my flatmate. This time I went alone. I'm not frightened of traveling alone. I mean, yes, we have snakes, we have dangers, but you just be mindful of that. Brown snakes, black snakes, this sort of thing, scorpions, spiders, all sorts of stuff going on. Generally, one can be pretty okay with a bit of bush common sense. Anyway, I misidentified a bunch of mushrooms and I put them into my food. I had dried stuff that I'd pre-dried, stewed it all up, and pow, it hit me with an experience that I was not expecting. Now, I'm kind of glad as a youth I was a surfer, and I had drugs before, like marijuana, and someone had given me LSD. So I knew what getting stoned was about, and I hadn't had any drugs, God, in a decade, easily a decade. I had a really bad LSD experience, which really scared the crap out of me. And I was glad I had it because my mind had matured 10 years through specific practices that I was doing with my mind. I was a freelance illustrator. And I think the process of my illustration enabled the ability of one-pointed meditation or one-pointed focus to sharpen. And that's what saved me. So my mind was much more mature when this mushroom kicked in. And it's not an hallucinatory experience. A lot of people assume that, oh, you took drugs and you hallucinated. This is not true. Hallucinations are a distortion of reality, a distortion. This did not distort at all. It expanded the experience or realities. Now, when I went into the area that I couldn't comprehend was, after my body had started to expand and balloon out, which was a very bizarre experience. I initially got scared. Yes, of course. I thought, I've taken something and I have no idea what I've taken here or what's happened. I clicked that it was obviously the mushrooms because that was the only insert that I'd put into the food with my meat and my potatoes and things like that. So I think I put in about 6 to 9 mushrooms, which is really huge. That's like, you're talking the grammage. I don't know grammage, but they say if you take 5 grams of psilocybin, for example, that's a really big hit. Well, I must have taken about 50, maybe more grams of Amanita muscaria. So not much was known about that mushroom. I had never heard of it, nor had I ever seen it before in my life, other than recognition later that it was the classic Santa Claus mushroom, the ones with the little gnomes and the elves on it. It's right throughout Europe. So after the expansion, I ended up expanding right throughout nature. And I think that has a lot to do with what I now know as the spiritual signature of that particular mushroom. Often these earth plants will, for some reason, and especially with mushrooms, they have some sort of a connection to the mycelium, the hyphae mycelium, which is the root system, and the spores. And the spores of fungi are right throughout. They are possibly nature's biggest living organism that connects whole forests together. And so, of course, the spirit of that particular mushroom or fungi takes you into that. Automatically you syncopate or you resonate with that particular spiritual or energetic frequency of the plant. This much I've gleaned, from the actual experience. I got to a point where I expanded right out to the stars. I was getting into what I felt were quantum fields of nature. I mean, I saw things that I couldn't readily put, how can I put the words to this? The information was streaming back so fast into my consciousness. It was immediate. It wasn't like conversation, question, answer, question, answer. That's a linear process. This was immediate, like pure telepathy with nature. That's all I can put it. It's like osmosis. There's no English language involved. I wasn't talking English to the experience. I was just observing it, and I was getting information pouring in.
Do you think that your answers were being answered at the instant that you were thinking the question? So it's all happening at the same time?
Yes, there's no duality. It's instant. There's no time delay. Yeah. And so what I was seeing was that there was life or light in the form of crystalline structures underpinning everything from trees, plants, rocks, the planet. Everything has crystalline structure in it. Excuse me. This became really important later, much later, because I went into a rock, for example, or a tree, and I knew it was a tree. I knew it was a rock. And then something strange happened. Once I started to get a grasp of that, then the time distorted. And that's probably the only time it became quote unquote hallucinatory, because when you start playing with time, time expansion and time contraction, this really was weird. But I understood what was going on after a particular process. When I went through it for some time, I thought, oh, time's speeding up. So I started to see the bush passing through seasons, like winter, spring, autumn, summer, this type of thing. I haven't got them in the right order, but basically what was happening is the seasons were starting to swirl around the planet, meaning I was seeing the seasons circumnavigating the whole planet. And I realized, and the energy of summer turning to autumn, when all the leaves fall off and everything discolors, but the energy was retracting back through nature, and then it was actually heading over to another area on the planet. So I started following this, and it was going like bouncing around, and I thought, I'm observing a whole year of energy flow through the 4 seasons. And that sped up, and I could see the earth actually expanding and contracting. It was breathing. And this was very, very bizarre. So when I focused on this aspect, I actually even went deeper, and I looked at the light within the rocks, within the trees, within the forest, and I realized that they were crystals, but not crystals how we observe them as in rocks. You know, a rock crystal in your hand. You know, like you've got a solid quartz crystal, for example. You hold it in your hand. These crystals had a very strange shape, and I drew them when I came back. Yes, and I later found out that they replicated structures called tensegrity structures. Now, that term was coined by Buckminster Fuller, I think, who was an architect. And what he did is he built architectural structures using strong and weak points of connection. So I realized that these strong and weak forces that held these very asymmetric means they're not symmetrical. These structures that were inside rocks, trees, and plants, and everything I looked at, they had this asymmetry. They were weird-looking crystals, but they were full of light. And there were 2 forms of light binding these crystals together. And I later realized that I was looking at the quantum field. And this, when I reflect on it, this was very profound, Jeff, because this quantum field, as I expanded out into the universe, and it became more relevant later when I spoke with the light telepathically, I realized on the Gestalt, the broader brushstroke here, is that the whole universe is just one liquid crystal. And what would happen is it steps down, the light steps down through a series of step-down processes into each dimension, solidifying into a more solidified crystal, of which we have this crystal within us in our DNA in the form of molecular structures that we call chemical chains. They form crystalline shapes in the way that they're structured. We have millions of these chemical chains in us that are actually forms of light. And I found out later that I could manipulate those chemical chains inside my biology by visualizing them, or even targeting illness, or observing these structures within me. I can still do it now. I don't do it often, but occasionally I do it if I'm feeling a little bit off. I actually access that.
Well, let me stop you there. You were mentioning
Sure.
the things that you saw within the earth. Did you get any
Yes.
indication that the earth itself is a sentient being?
I would use that term now. Years ago, before, I was an atheist before. I didn't believe in anything, but I would say yes, the earth has a frequency, but it can fluctuate. It's not a stable frequency. It can fluctuate. How does it fluctuate? Well, this is when we start to get into some very weird territory in regarding to the Schumann resonance, which is well known about it. But we also have an electromagnetic grid that surrounds the planet. This grid just swirls around the planet. It's a measurable grid, but that grid fluctuates depending on the position of the sun, the moon, and the planets. So we have fluctuating magnetic grids. This later, I ended up formulating a theory about gravity, light, consciousness, time, and space. I mean, maybe I'm overlapping on the space and the but there's those 4 or 5 main features where consciousness is actually linked into gravitational waves. Our consciousness can be affected by time, light, gravity, and space. And I thought, wow, but they all fluctuate. So this is where I formulated a semi-theory that astrology has to work, because depending on the position of the planets, they form crystalline structures. Anybody who's done astrology can see all the little shapes. They form geometric shapes, which are actually crystals in a 2-dimensional form, right? They're flat crystals.
During your NDE or during any other time, have you ever seen pre-birth memories? And if so, is it possible that you planned this NDE to happen beforehand?
That's a frightening question, because what it does is it gets into the notion of predestiny versus choice. I've struggled with predestiny versus choice personally, because it's dualistic in construct, choice versus predestiny. Well, because, okay, initially I didn't want to come back from the light. I didn't want to return. Who would? The love was phenomenal. That's a given. So, and it said, don't worry, we, quote unquote, are always here, always. And it emphasized that. And so the questions I asked when I was talking to the light itself, which came much later in the experience, I thought I didn't even study those subjects. Like I mentioned, I said specifically, no one's going to believe me. And so what I did, this is when I was in front of the light, after going through the tunnel and all of that. And I thought, no one's going to believe me. I'm a nobody. Who would believe me? Like I don't have letters after my name, and I was a bit of a joker. I never really had a serious connection to study or anything like that. And I asked what the pyramids were for. And this was an odd question, because I had no interest in the pyramids. I had no interest in world mysteries. So I wondered whether or not those questions were subtly pre-planted into me to be discharged at the point of my NDE, which would infer that my NDE was predestined.
What about this? Is it possible that you could have at least created output or outpoints in your lifetime? So as if you're not going to whatever your life's purpose is, you have these possible outpoints where you either leave and start over, or you go out and you rediscover, hey, I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And when you come back, you get back on track.
That's a good point. An outpoint, could you paraphrase that as an exit point? Meaning death?
Yeah, that's probably a better way to put it. Like we set up, you set up possible exit points, whether it was this or other times in your life. Maybe you get into other accidents.
Well, this is a good point. And I think we have to bring in karma here. Karma just means action. It's a Eastern word meaning action. Actions, both good and bad, are based off probably predestined plans, which a lot of people are quoting that we have predestiny, before we come in and a pre-plan to fulfill X amount of, experiences. My life has been pretty hard prior to the NDE, very hard. And then after the NDE, it hasn't been rosy either. So I've been kind of cornered in such that mirrors in the form of experiences kept repeating until I bloody well got it. And I've gone, oh, so I'm forced into thinking and reflecting a lot harder than normal to retain this information and retain the experience as teacher, as my personal teacher. So I've had to go through some really bad hardships, real king hits, on the ground, fetal position crying type of experiences. And then I've gone, okay, I really get it now, I get it. And then it humbles you up, yes. So my exit points, I could have easily exited, Jeff, easily. And I think that my NDE was an exit. It wasn't a suicide, but it was, if it was pre-planned, I was ready, I was fed up, to a point where I thought, I didn't care what happened in life. Not that I was laissez-faire about it. I just thought I hadn't had any great outcomes up to that point. Everything had been shattered. Like I lost a partner in a car accident with my daughter. And I had a good career in the military and the Navy, and that was all cut short. So there was all of these experiences that just kept on getting truncated and cut short. I thought, come on, man, this is unfair. I mean, I'm a hard worker and I'm really diligent. I'm very focused, and nothing would work out. I'd get to a certain benchmark, and then that would be what one would consider an exit point. But then I got pushed even harder to go higher. Higher meaning subtler, go deeper into me, into my archetype, into my subconscious. And so the NDE literally pushed me through the back door and out and up. Literally, you cannot get any deeper than an NDE or an OBE or similar, right? So obviously I was pushed. That was my exit point. So when people say, to be born again, I was literally born again. Now, if I had have died and carried on to the light, left the body behind, to recapture all of that information in a preceding life or the next life would have been just as hard. Obviously, it was predestined for something. The fact that I had to come back, most people come back and say, well, why? Why did I come back to this? Well, obviously, my job may not be finished yet. I still may have things that I have to do, which is conjecture from my part and hypothetical. So as far as exit points, yes, I agree with that. Some people, again, I mentioned karma, and this is where karma, I spent 10 years contemplating karma, meaning action. If we all have subjective relative karma and we have to take the inputs of karma, the emotional input, the environment, your gender that you choose in this life, because I saw multiple lives during my life review, quote unquote, I just didn't get what I'd done harm to someone or good to someone. I got multiple lives. I saw about 10 lives. And I didn't understand what I was looking at. But then now I realize what I was looking at, that all of those lives were needed to get John to this particular incarnation as an Anglo-Saxon Western in Australia in this time frame. This, again, contrived 2022, which is a contrived date. This is a date that was placed on us by the Vatican based off the supposed Jesus being year zero. We are not the only calendar on the planet, so we don't know where we are in time, and that's another question. But the karmic inputs are different for everyone. I wrote a bit of a summary on Facebook about that you might incarnate to perform one single thing, one little job, no matter how minuscule. That is the job that you came to do. And it's not that it's any less valued. It's just that was your karma to fulfill in that particular time frame. Once you fulfill it, then you might be able to exit. This is why sometimes people die when they're young. They come, some people are kids, sometimes the kids are 3 months old, 2 months old, devastating for a parent to lose their child. But that child has karma, as does the parent. So this is when you get into dynamics of, karma within two entities within the same family unit. It's very hard to discern.
Have you discovered for this lifetime what is your karmic reason or purpose for being here?
Yes.
What is it?
I can't tell you. but I have a fair idea. Yes. Now, I didn't then. It's getting to a point.
All right. I noticed that you use the word the light, and I'm assuming that's how you are referring to God. And if,
a lot of okay.
If that's true or not, can you give us a definition or your definition of what God is?
Okay, I'll give you a rhetorical on that. Tell me something that God isn't.
Yeah.
Because as soon as we try to describe what it is, you fall short. It's too vast. It's incomprehensible. It's ineffable. That's why they use these terms. But we've heard them so often: infinite, ineffable. But we still have finite limits on describing infinite.
Yeah.
Right. So I say, well, what isn't God? Because I came from the opposite direction on that. I say, well, it's in everything. And I did ask that because I said, where are you? Because I'd gone through the process of nature, the void, the gate, the tunnel. Then I went through various subtle gates further on. And then I finally reached the light. And I'm in absolute awe in front of this. I get upset. I get emotional about it. So, because it knew me already. I'd been there millions of times, Jeff, millions. And I thought, wow, I'm home. I don't want to go back. Why would I want to go back? This is where we come from. We all come from there. And it was a shock. I was probably shocked, but my mind wasn't in the same space as John down here. You're raw. I was in spirit, my soul, and it could see everything, absolutely everything. It knew everything. But I use the word conundrum a lot when I describe what I saw. It was like the oldest entity that one can ever comprehend, and yet it was like a baby. It was like an unborn child as well as the oldest cognitive. Yeah. So it was the opposite. It had extreme opposites within the unity of it. It knew everything. So why bother even incarnating into flesh or going into other forms if it already knew everything? And this gets into a very esoteric area of who or what is God? How did it begin? How many cycles of big bangs has this thing been through? Was there an original Big Bang? How can something that's fully conscious even have consciousness? What is consciousness? What is awareness? What is knowing? We're dealing with some really big questions here. And we can only see them from the perspective of a human entity. And we battle with these questions as the very fabric of our existence. We always ask, where are we from? Where are we now? And where the hell are we going? Where do we really come from? Were we spontaneously created? Did we evolve through apes? Did extraterrestrials make us? Come on, show me the proof. Where's the proof? And the problem is we don't have much proof. All we have is we are here. And we are stuck in this limbo with no history, this hidden history that goes back into eons, this dark, shadowy history that we know we've got remnants of that history in the form of architecture, like in Egypt with the pyramids and stuff, which is one area of inquiry. And we know that we're pushing the boundaries of time back with that inquiry, with good scholars out there saying there's no freaking way that great pyramid could have been built in 20 years or in 2560 BC. How come we've forgotten the knowledge in 2,500 short years or 4,000 short years? We've forgotten the knowledge of moving a 1-ton block.
Mhm.
I mean, I think I joked about that with you the other day about moving a 1-ton block through sand. You ever try it? It digs in, boiling hot sand. When I walk on the beach in summer, I burn my feet off just walking on the beach, walking 100 yards to the water.
You mentioned earlier that you were an atheist. Was it your
Yeah.
NDE that changed you into whatever you label yourself now as?
Yes, and I don't give myself a label. I mean, I don't like the word believer because beliefs denote beliefs, and beliefs have limitations. I'm swing more towards panentheism. That's not to be confused with pantheism. Pantheism is the worship of the planet, the worship of animals as God. But you got to remember, in the the Judeo-Christian version of mythology of the creation myth, God actually made the heavens and the earth first, made the animals, made the insects, made the plants, all before us. We came last. And if one wants to go even further, Adam and Eve were created last. So we're humans are really inconsequential when you think in terms of the creation myth according to the Judeo-Christian myth. So if the creator, you're not even allowed to use that word because it's considered New Age, got to say God. Well, okay, God, I'm happy with that. I'll call it anything you want as long as you can equate to it. Well, if God made all of those things first, then obviously those things were used to sustain us, to allow us to actually survive in this biosphere. We need plants. Plants, medicines come from plants. We need insects. They pollinate plants. All of these kingdoms, the mineral kingdom, our body is full of those minerals because the plants break those minerals down and they help our bone growth and they give us overall health. So we need all of those kingdoms to survive. Now, they don't need us to survive at all.
Do you ever consider that maybe humans really don't fit in with the whole biosphere of the earth because we're here kind of wrecking everything?
We are. Very good point, Jeff. We are trashing the joint. And so what's happening is, to coin a word from the Hopi Indians, they call it koyaanisqatsi, out of balance. We are out of balance. And I think this comes from an aberration in our process of awareness and our role in the universe. We tend to take, and this is not a gender attribute, but we tend to take a patriarchal overview on our domination of the planet. And I think that comes from the Western biblical thing of, tame all of these animals you can name and, in the creation myth. Rather than understand them, we're dominating them, which is a patriarchal, masculine energy dominant. There's another energy form in us that which as a musician, you being a musician, which is more passive receptive. And that's the feminine intuitive. That's where you listen and you feel the rhythms, you listen and you watch. It's more of a passive receptive, and you get enormous amounts of information and patterns come to you, and recognition patterns and all sorts of information. And you see and observe bigger patterns. And this is what the NDE did to me, is it made me an observer of those patterns. And that's the way I can actually describe the experience so well, is because I'm obviously quite intuitive and I can actually explain the patterns that I saw very well. Then you've got to attribute them to something that we can understand down here.
What is your opinion on higher selves? And do you feel like you connected with your higher self, if you believe in that, during your NDE?
That's a good question. And that gets into the strata of human consciousness itself. It's a metaphysical question, as well as possibly a cosmological question. Metaphysics is the study of an inward journey, a mystical journey, in seeing your place that transcends the mundane. So we have a mundane consciousness, and this is where a lot of this sacred information has been lost in regards to our animal nature. And once I read, say, the Book of Enoch, they have a book of animals, started to make sense in regards to our animal nature. that we have very similar behavioral patterns to apes in the jungle. And so when I studied certain writings from other people, this confirmed in me what I'd seen in my NDE when the light took me back in time, millions of years, and it showed me where we came from, how we evolved. That was the linear evolution. That was the long evolution, the biological evolution. That is not the evolution of consciousness, though. But so I'm getting a little bit off. Just give me the question again. I want to just pinpoint that.
I was just seeing what your thoughts are. I was seeing what your thoughts are about higher self, and did you connect with your higher self?
Yeah, good. Yeah, okay, that keeps me on track. This I'm answering it in an asymmetrical way because consciousness is a different evolution to our linear evolution.
Let me stop you there. I'm going to re-ask that, and I want to add something to it.
Sure.
So what I was asking you was your opinion on higher selves, and if you connected with your higher self. But also, sometimes I have guests that during their NDEs contact people who are still living on the earth. So my theory is that they're contacting with their higher self.
Well, the higher self, to paraphrase it, what happens is you're reducing your attachment to your lower self. So it's always there. That higher self is always there. And when you've peeled away the onion skins of that lower self and you keep peeling away, you end up with a pure awareness. And that awareness is the observer observing the observer. So I'm observing JeffMara on the podcast, but there's an awareness behind that is detached from that. I'm labeling, my mundane awareness is labeling you JeffMara, right? Your mundane awareness will label me as John, but there's an awareness just of an entity in front of me who behind that has another form of energy of awareness. So there's masks within masks. So that's on a vertical strata. Once you got to move up the vertical chain, meaning, we're spheres, we're these onion-like spheres, within spheres, like a Russian poopy doll, a babushka doll, sorry. They have these different layers, and that's what we're like. So what happens is in my NDE, I breached those layers. And I discovered that my consciousness was in that other layer. It was already there. It already pre-existed. It wasn't something that didn't exist. And when I went further and further and further, I realized that the light itself, the absolute pure light, we are part of it, and yet we're just merely separated from it during the incarnation process. And we go through multiple dimensions, and we're still connected with it always. So once we die, as we get older, we start to peel those onion skins away, and we actually go, funny enough, we go back to being like a child, and we start to have these weird memories of when we were children. But then when we die, we're just going back through our own consciousness again. And so we're ultimately meeting our absolute nature when we die, which is love. Ultimately, it's love, but that love is expansive. It's not just a word. It's everything, because there's problems to resolve with love. Sometimes there's blocks. Sometimes there's people who are obnoxious. Sometimes you have anger issues and emotional issues, mental issues. These are all the onion skins that we keep masking and veiling ourselves. And this goes again back to the original fall in the Judeo-Christian myth, where we fell out of Eden and we covered ourselves up with skins, or we made a veil. This is a classic metaphor for covering up our true nature. And with that true nature, we're actually hiding from God. We're hiding from ourselves, and we're hiding from God, both together simultaneously. But whilst you're hiding from each other. So we're all running around with these little masks on. So yes, we do meet our higher self, but that higher self is not limited. There is an absolute and a relative. And we are often in the relative subjective. And so, of course, to remain, to use a term, naked, once you become naked and you're honest, you see your flaws, you see your faults. We're not perfect, of course not, but you just let that go. Don't get a hang up on that. Just let that go. So look, I screwed up. I did something wrong. I called someone a name. I got angry. This is part of the veiling and habits that we've formed through so many various, environment, family, upbringing, traumas. All of these things affect and create veils over us. And true healing is about healing those traumas, letting them go. Don't be attached to them, because as soon as you attach yourself to the trauma, you identify with the trauma. And this can happen on a singular and a collective level, with whole countries are traumatized. Like, look at the Holocaust and massacres and the destruction of Native Americans and all of these tribal people around the planet. They carry trauma, and it's epigenetic, it's passed on. Even war can create trauma. Epigenetically can travel on, where the victim becomes the aggressor, and it just keeps on perpetuating trauma. This is all the masking, moving away from self, moving away from that absolute purity of who you really are, which is a pure divine being, or a piece of the divine being that's come down into a relative entity or a vessel. And you're trapped in veiling,
Besides encountering the light or God, did you happen to encounter any other beings, whether they were angels or just non-human entities or ETs or anything?
I did, but when I went to the void, okay, that was the dark space. That was after I'd been to the planet and I blacked out, went through the planet nature. Then I found myself in a dark space. And I say it wasn't void because my consciousness was still aware of my consciousness, and I was still John. So it wasn't empty, but I was the only thing in it. Excuse me. But then I felt a presence. I couldn't see it. Every time I tried to look at it, and again, you have holographic, or I had holographic view in my, you're absolutely clairvoyant when you're out of your body. And I couldn't see it. It kept on evading me, but I knew it was benevolent. It wasn't a negative. And it was the one that manifested just before a gate opened. A gate manifested after that. And I could intuit, because I was still processing the whole experience, I could intuit that it was allowing me to have the choice to go through or not. And I chose to go through the gate. And I said, what the hell? Here we go, or something like that. And I went through. But then later on, when I was going through the tunnel, I hit more what we'd call crystalline skins, or like gates. They were like crystalline, beautiful, ethereal. And then they were folding. They folded a few times. And they opened up a little gate. And this is when I started to understand about tensegrity structures turning into symmetrical crystalline form. This is a very deep subject I won't go into, Jeff, because it's just pointless, because it's too out there. Mm-hmm. But these gates were folded and created openings or portals. But I sensed that guide, or that angel, whatever you want to call it, was there with me. But it never said anything to me at all. This is where, like, a form of telepathic osmosis was passed to me, that I just knew, I had to do this. Whether it was doing it, folding these gates, or I was doing it, it just happened. And I felt like I was being let into certain gates. And it was all bathed in love. There was no feelings of anything negative outside of myself, because you've got to differentiate between external and internal when you're in this space. My feelings, I had apprehension in some things, mainly in the void, because I had no point of reference. I didn't know where the hell I was in the void. It was just pure black. And I mean black as black. There was nothing there. But I realized that was an intermediary place in between getting to the gate. So there is this gap. And the only way I can explain it in physics, it would be like the gap between the electron and the neutron. There's this space in between, right? And that's exactly what I felt it was. They were connected, yes. Energy flows from the light down in through that gate, or into everyone's gate. Everyone has a singular, but there's also a collective gate that you can't get through unless you're taken through it, in my opinion. That's what I've experienced, because I've never heard anyone talk about the gate or describe it in their NDE. So, but later I did ask about it, what were the pyramids used for? And they said it was used to communicate with entities throughout the universe. Entities. Well, what's an entity? Extraterrestrials. That proves they exist for me. And then later, years later, I asked Spirit again in prayer, and I said, look, I know they exist. Can I see them? I asked specifically in prayer to see them. And that's when I had about 4 experiences. And that was very dislocating, much more dislocating than the NDE was dislocating it through my life 180 degrees. But the extraterrestrial involvement is so out there on such a fringe wilderness level that it's very, very, the average person who doesn't have that level of discernment puts it into a dualistic framework of good, bad, devil, demon, angel, light. And it's something that's beyond human comprehension as to we can only infer or hypothesize why they're here at this time frame. If these demons, supposed ETs, were demons, they could have controlled the planet millions of years ago. Why would they just appear in the last 30 years or 40 years or 60 years of human evolution? They've chosen to come here because of the damage and destruction that we're involved in at the moment, not only of the earth, but of ourselves. We're imploding. We're like a toilet backing up with so much excrement we can't hit the flush button. To use a euphemism, not a very clean one, but there's all this poop's coming up, and it's like we're not dealing with it. We're not dealing with it. We keep blaming and pointing. It's you, it's you. It's like the mirrors of our shadow are starting to manifest. We're moving into collectively, we're moving into our subconscious. We're going through a collective NDE.
That's interesting a way to put it. You know, people talk about that we're going through, or we will be going through the ascension, but is that true, or is human behavior even getting worse?
We're ascending at the level of our karma and our previous lives here. And I just looked and I found a passage in the Bible the other day that proves that this ascension is actually the same thing as the resurrection. It's absolutely the same thing, because the biblical discourse is that we are raised from the dead. Some are asleep, some awake, or dead and alive. This is how they paraphrase the 4 attributes. And they said that, I think it's in the book of 1 Corinthians 23, I think. 1 Corinthians 15:23. I read it this morning. And it said something along the lines that the Christ would come first and be raised up, then the first fruits. In fact, I'll get the passage and I'll read it. May I? May I
Sure.
do that specifically?
Why not?
Because I feel a lot of Christians say that they'll think they'll all be raised at once, and I've actually found proof that that's not the case. That there's actually a staggered lifting. Here we go. People can write this down if they want. 1 Corinthians 15:23. I was correct in citing that. It says, "For as in Adam all die, so in Christ all will be made alive."
I'm so sorry. Don't start that over. I'm gonna put it up myself. 1 Corinthians.
Okay. 1 Corinthians 15:23. Or you can start from 1:15:22 if you like.
It's gonna pull it up.
Adam.
Let me give me one second so I can pull it up on mine while you're reading it. I can follow along. Okay.
Okay. So in 1:15:22. 1 Corinthians 15:20 says, "For as in Adam all die," well, Adam is the first Adam, that's the golem, the one that performed the sin that caused the fall. "For as in Adam all die, so in Christ all will be made alive, but each in his own turn. Christ, the first fruits, then when he comes, those who belong to him, then the end will come, when he hands over the kingdom to God." So that phrase is small, it's very small, but it's pregnant. But each in his own turn. And then there's 3 liftings: Christ, the first fruits, then when he comes, those who belong to him. So that proves that this is a staggered lifting. This ascension does not happen all in one go. From the theological point of view, I think they talk about the second coming. It's not the second coming. I've found 7 comings, but that's a moot point. This would be a theological discourse on a higher level. But the 7th coming is the 7th return of Christ, because he actually manifests 5 times in the resurrection. He comes physical, then he manifests 4 times as he comes to the disciples, to the 2 disciples or Mary, then the 2 disciples, then he manifests to Thomas, then he manifests to the 12 disciples, but then in the book of Corinthians, he manifests to 500 disciples, so that's 6 times. Then finally he comes as the Messiah, which is the 7th coming, which is a wrathful event. It is a completely wrathful event. So each one of those events, I think, are different time frames of the resurrection. Resurrection, being brought awake or made awake and coming alive from the dead, this is not a new concept. This is found in other theologies before Christianity came up with that idea. So, but the fact that they stagger that lifting, they stagger that ascension, and that's through what they call the bride and bridegroom theology of the marriage of the bride and bridegroom. The bridegroom is Christ and the church is the bride. Now, the church is another breakdown of what constitutes a church. Now, a lot of people believe that their church, because they're in a church that's, within a group, whether you're Pentecostal, Baptist, whatever, they think that their church will be lifted up as one whole. Yeah, that could be possible, maybe. But Christ didn't define the church as a group. He said it was any 2 or 3 that gather in his name. So, they talk about, there's other parables there about, being lifted up and one will go and one will stay. All of these parables. So you've got to put all of these correlating passages together. And you say, well, what is actually lifting up? What is lifting up? The literalists will say, oh, their body is lifted up, like goes up into heaven in a cloud, and they meet with Christ in the heavenly clouds. Well, physics would laugh at that and say, well, you can't fly. I mean, I've never seen a human being do that in my life. So it must be a lifting of consciousness. Once you apply this to a metaphorical, allegorical, and symbolic level, then we're dealing with levels of consciousness. And to get a deeper understanding of the movement of consciousness, you need to read the Merkabah Chariot teachings. And that's where you can get a grasp of that through the book of Ezekiel, where they talk of seeing angels descending and ascending on ladders. This is all Kabbalistic. You have to study the Tree of Life in Kabbalah to understand what that means. Now, Kabbalah has been demonized by modern Christianity, and yet Kabbalah actually means to receive. It was even Moses received, visions on Mount Sinai. He received the teachings and the 10 Commandments. It's called Kabel in Hebrew. Kabel is a truncated version of Kabbalah. So this is all there if people want to study it, but often people don't want to, and they want to remain in their habitual known, teachings and beliefs. I'm not like that. I'm thinking, no, it's like I go where spirit takes me. And if God says, read this, it doesn't say it like, read this. You just get this strong urge, this intuitive urge to be guided to something. And then you go into it and you go, aha, that answered the question I had a month back or a week back. I asked for an answer, and then you're guided to what you need to find out. So the ascension, sadly, New Agers have been attacked viciously, saying that somehow it's satanic, that we're the false light. And I thought, well, hang on, we're not promoting world dominance. We're not out to rip you off or take your soul over. Some people have problems with it because they're far too open, and they do open themselves up to negative forces because they've got no spiritual discernment. They just go willy-nilly off and they go and meditate without taking checks and balances. Doing some of these modalities will open up your energy centers. We are a body of light. We are a whole temple of light, And if you open it up too quickly, you can have mental problems. You can end up mentally ill. I know a monk of 18 years of meditating, and he opened up on a level, and the monastery asked him to leave because he went too hard, too fast, against what the master had told him to do. So, yes, there's dangers in opening up your light body too quickly and ascending too quickly.
Now, it's been a long time since you've had your NDE, but are you still getting any new aha moments or new information coming that cause you to still reevaluate your NDE and put it in a new perspective?
I still get visions, Jeff, and they come in a series of 4. that's the pattern. Ever since my NDE, I did get a lot of visions. I got some as recently as 218. I recently got a vision about Joshua, the book of Joshua. And like I keep going back to the Bible. Like I do study a little bit of Buddhism and Hinduism and try to do comparative study, but for some reason, Spirit wants me to read that particular book. And I'd read the book of Joshua 3 times already over the years. I've nearly read my Bible all up about 3 or 4 times. And I was shown, I woke up as recently as about a month ago and I reread, Joshua was very strong in me. It wasn't a direct vision. Sometimes I get direct visions, but I woke up and I thought I have to read it again. And I've made links to in the book of Joshua. It's one of the most violent books, by the way. There's a lot of killing involved. And to give viewers who are maybe not learned in biblical stuff, that Joshua was handed over the priesthood when Moses died. Moses passed away, Mount Nebo, and then they were entering into the promised land. And Joshua then went in and basically butchered the whole of the promised land and cleaned it up. And they stormed, the classic story of surrounded what do I call it? Jericho, the walls of Jericho. There's that famous one when they march around and then, on the 6th day, they blasted the trumpet, or on the 7th, or they marched for 6 days, and on the 7th day, they blasted the trumpet. But there's a lot of symbolism in the numbers 6 and 7. And then, of course, they blow these trumpets. And I thought, hang on, blowing trumpets 7 times. Oh, that links. And I got this vision linked to the 7 trumpets in the book of Revelation. So I thought, that's interesting. So I did ring a colleague, a female who is a minister, and I just crossed it by her just to double check that I'd got the story right. So yes, that's to answer your question. Yes, I still get visions. That one's probably not relevant for the moment, and it won't make sense just yet as to if I explain it in a conclusive way. Other visions are more direct. One in 2018, late 2018, I got a series of 4 visions about the world economy and about the collapse of the world economy and the upcoming police state. I got one about President Trump, which was alarming, and I don't want to give the whole vision. If he comes back into power in 2024, I would give a stiff warning to leave the cities. That's all I'm saying about that. Move to the country, find yourself a little country homestead, get away from, say, New York and LA and places like that. That's if Trump gets back in. Now, he's been killed off. When I got the vision, he was in power, but he has been abyssed into the annals of history, never to return again. I mean, they even cut him off from social media, which was a very weird thing to do to a former president of the United States. In America, we all look up to America as the bastion of free speech, and yet they wouldn't allow someone to have that free speech, which I found rather odd. And there's a lot of commentary going on. I don't particularly swing either way, Republican or Democrat. I'm not into politics. I'll give you that disclaimer now. I step back and observe what's going on with it. As I said, if he comes back, and we've got Elon Musk has just purchased Twitter for billions of dollars, and he's even swung to Republican. And he's even claiming he might even put Trump back onto his platform. So I thought, what's going on here? So these are little signals just creeping back in that, if he makes a comeback and he, stands for presidency, who else is going to stand, I don't know.
In the beginning, I mentioned you're an author and your book is called God's Mountain. And I think the mountain that you're referring to is the pyramid. Or no?
I'll just give you my answer with a smile.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, if you want to know more about John's book, I'm assuming it's on Amazon, right?
Yeah. Yes, it is Amazon Prime. Yeah.
You can read it and find out what is God's Mountain.
Let me say it this way. It's funny that all throughout history, people have gone to mountains to receive visions. Native Americans do it. They go up on the mountain, they do Humblecha, which is their 4-day vision quest. Then they might come down, they might get a vision, they might not. I mean, Indigenous people here go to mountaintops. They have done for millennia. What is the association between climbing the top of a mountain and getting, I mean, if God's God, God can sort of communicate to you anywhere, right? Why go to the top of a mountain? So what is this connection between mountains? Now, if in the ancient times, the only structure that possibly would be big enough to be a mountain, and it was associated with thunder and lightning. I mean, you know, the Great Pyramid, when it may have been operating, it was churning out a ton of energy or channeling a ton of energy, which would have caused the ionization of the atmosphere at the capstone. Of course, could that cause thunder and lightning rumblings at the top of the mountain with flashes of lightning as it arced out like a giant Tesla coil? I mean, let the viewer and the listener discern. Put the science together. Now, I've said what the pyramid function is. I've released the secret of the pyramid, its function, in great detail in the book. And I challenge anyone on the planet to disprove it. Now, you can't, because no one can replicate it, because it's non-functional at the moment. If it was opened up again, it's too powerful for the level that we're living in, the state of consciousness, because it was connected to consciousness. And we keep looking at, I think Matthias Stefanos said it recently. I've only watched one of his videos because it had about the pyramid on it, and he didn't actually talk about the pyramid at all in great detail. But he said it was the consciousness of the people of Atlantis back then. It was the consciousness of the Atlanteans was so high. That was where the technology was in the mind. And I thought I'll give him a tick on that one, a big green tick. It was the consciousness that was high technology, and the technology was built for the consciousness, not the other way around. Does that?
Right.
I know it doesn't make sense, but it's like they were symbiotic, the user and the used, like the driver and the car. And you can't use the pyramid without the drivers. It had a function on practical levels and esoteric levels.
I'm running out of time, but I want to mention also, or go back to, that I also said that John is an artist. And if you look at his work, he's a top-notch artist. And his I think your website is johnscottartist.com.
You got a better memory than I do. Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah.
And I'm trying to talk him in to start painting NDEs. So hopefully I'll get through to him, and we'll see if he'll be up for it.
Okay, I'll start on a series. How does that sound?
All right.
I think that's a challenge.
It's a challenge.
Bit of a gauntlet. It's big, it's vast, because how can you paint everything? You know, it's not that easy. Well, as I said, I've got a blank canvas. We joked earlier that I've got a blank canvas here. That's exactly what the light looks like. But it doesn't show the emotional and the knowledge and all the emotions involved, the undercurrent. You know, all of that stuff is, you can't put it down on anything. You can't write about it. You can't portray it in visual or any of our five sense perceptions. Look, we know what it feels like to love. We know what it feels like to give love, imbued with emotion, right? Amplify that to stratospheric levels. You know, if my soul was crying, even though I had no tear ducts or eyes, my soul was crying from the sheer awe and the love. And of course, it's pounding me with love, and it would accelerate that. It accelerated, it augmented the love as well, right? When I merged with it. And it was like, I just, you know, it's just like you, like a giant, you just, you explode all together. You want to stay, you want to be there. There's nothing to be scared of. God's not a big boogeyman that, you know, says, right, you know, you're going to go down there and check out the guy with the big horns. That's where you're going. And but that's the old, you know, Jehovah violent God that's smiting people with lightning and thunder and whomping people. No, that's that part of the Old Testament is mirroring. It's a mirror. It mirrors our animal nature, our revenge, all of our lower attributes. That's what the Bible to me is. It's a mirror of the whole spectrum of human consciousness. And we can choose which book or which testament or which covenant that we want to follow. And you'll find this is why people keep changing churches and they keep on fracturing away from the ecclesia. We've had 40,000 denominations that claim they've got the truth, and they're all arguing with everyone. I've got the truth. 40,000 denominations all telling us they've all got the truth. It's all relative. But you resonate to the level that you have grown into. This is why some scriptures can be interpreted, some are not relevant anymore. We've passed those days when we need to blow whole countries up. Well, some of us have,
It's interesting
smiting
I was saying it's interesting that you use the word resonate, because on maybe the majority of the NDEs, there's always somebody that says in the comments, this was my favorite NDE. So even though every NDE is different from every other one, it resonates with somebody.
Yeah, and that's the beauty, I suppose, of everybody having different experiences, because Joe Blog, to use that term, for the average person, I'm an average person, but that Joe Blog out there who's just lost his dog or his mum, or a parent who's lost a child, they don't want to hear about the esoteric stuff. It doesn't interest them. They want to hear, will they see that person again? Absolutely, absolutely. God knows exactly where you're at on your level, exactly where you're at, right? Spiritual relativity, or the growth of each individual, does vary. No problems. We're all loved ultimately. But our understandings, we have different, deeper understandings of different meaning underneath things. So I tend to overstep that. I went through a lot of emotional stuff too when I lost my partner and daughter in a car accident. A lot of self-questioning. That's what probably got me on my original path. If someone had turned around at me and said, "Don't worry, you'll reincarnate," I would have punched them in the face. I would have said, "What?" I was consumed with my grief, and it takes time to get over that grief, and then ultimately we do get over it. Well, some do, some don't, and sometimes it's extremely hard to get over the loss of a loved one. I get that, but nothing's lost. Nothing's lost, because in physics, you can't create something out of nothing. That's the first law of thermodynamics. And that has to apply to metaphysics, that we came from somewhere else. We're embedded into this darkness, then to become fully awake and become enlightened, to become aware and awake and alive. And you get the questions answered as you grow. And if we're not growing, then we remain in darkness. And some people stubbornly want to remain in their grief and their sorrow, and they, why? And it's like, well, if you keep asking the questions, they're inside you, but you're going to have to do the work. You can't be carried, you can't be carried on every trauma that you go through. Somewhere along the line, you're going to have to confront those traumas and say, why did they happen to me? Why? And that gets us into the deeper cosmology of pre-causality, predestiny versus choice. And these choices are made second by second, Jeff, not big choices. I'm talking every day we have to make choices on how we react to people, how we grow, whether or not we want to keep studying or stop studying or take that exit point. And I think when people go so grey, they take that exit point. They've had enough and they just say, no, I want to go. I've had enough.
I recently had a guest, and the guest and I were talking about that basically maybe the whole point of this incarnation is choices.
Yeah, and I'm questioning that, because some people, I believe, may have come back to fulfill previous karma, but others have chosen to come here, the more advanced souls. We're not any better. I'm not saying I'm one of them. I'm just saying that some have chosen to come back to help those other ones, to just lift them up a bit and try to nudge them along a bit. And that's what I think the time, what Christianity calls Pentecost, was a time of uplifting when spirit hit all people, not just the church. It hit New Ages, it hit everyone. And this is another debate and subject that can be discussed with maturity and not defensiveness about my way is the right way. They're all the right way. You're all going to get there as long as you keep putting one foot in front of the other. But some people keep formulating habitual thoughts where they keep repeating. And that's moribund, that's death. You've got to grow. And when those shells break, meaning the shells of consciousness, and they will be broken, they're being broken right now. Every reality we're having will be broken because it states a new heaven and a new earth will come, and the old heaven and the old earth will go. That means everything is going to change, but it's about in here. It's all about here. There's parables about old wineskins, putting new wine into old wineskins. They won't work. You've got to have a new wineskin. You've got to change your physical. You've got to work on changing your consciousness down here. It's imperative to spiritual receptivity.
You know, John, I could keep this going on for another hour or two, but I'll have to save that for podcast number 7. So before, I don't know.
7, no, you're right.
So
I'll do 7. I'll do 7 in line with the sacred number. Okay, what do I see? Yeah, that's right. I'll do one more.
But before we go, can you leave us with one last positive message?
Just be kind. Just be kind and be nice to people. I know it's really difficult because we are in a very dark space, and it may get a bit darker before it gets a bit lighter. That I'm just seeing something that I don't like at the moment. There's a lot of good people out there. Just hang in there. It's not going to be forever. We all have to go through this testing and trying time, all of us, you know, and good people like yourself. Thank you for putting this podcast up and allowing people to talk about this very esoteric experience. This is gold, Jeff. It's gold. You are one of the best interviewers in this subject. Because you're learning as well. This is helping your spiritual growth as well. And it's forcing me to dig for questions I haven't thought about for a long time, you know. So thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, John, thank you for being my guest and coming on the show again. I wish you the best.
I'd like to finally say before I go, Jeff, that round earth behind you is too curved, man. But anyway.
I should have brought up the flat one. I didn't even think about that.
And for the viewers, it's an inside joke.
Right.
Earth is not flat, it's round.
Right. And I don't know, 2 or 3 podcasts previously, John made me a flat earth, and we had it on the podcast. And I don't know why I didn't think about bringing it back up again, but we'll have to do it on podcast 7.
Well, I think that the flat earth theory is derived from the Book of Enoch. And I mean, we can put that into another discussion later as to what the firmament is, the ends of the world. Giants stuck in the south region or the polar region, they're trapped. So there's all of these esoteric passages that really need to be nutted out. That's the threefold book of Enoch 1, 2, and 3, which they found hidden in Ethiopia. And it's been they call it apocryphal, not non-canonical, but it's like, no, Enoch's mentioned in, you know, front texts of canon. You know, I've read over 200 apocrypha all up, I think, including those books and metaphysics. So I think, no, you've got to incorporate it all. There was a library. There was a much bigger library, and that library's been contaminated and half of it's missing. Most of it's missing. We have a remnant of a book. There's hardly got anything left of the real inner Gnostic work, the Gnostic knowledge. And again, all of this stuff was handed down orally, master to student. Moses used to talk orally to his, you know, Jesus spoke orally to his disciples. A lot of it wasn't written down because it was too esoteric. It couldn't be written down. It was something you needed to experience. And the NDE is in that realm, I feel, in my opinion. You know?
Maybe we'll get to it in number 7. Thanks again, John.
Thank you, Jeff.
Great rest of your evening.
Yeah. Good night, everyone.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.